I had never seen such barren emptiness. When the wind blows down from the north, it howls like a tajia, like a living thing, as if the air knows the pain of the bitter cold. At first, the desolation frightens you. It would frighten any person. Before long, you think to yourself, this must be hell. You think to yourself, nothing could survive here. You'd be wrong. A strong wind was blowing down from the north. Fine powdered snow, frozen as hard and sharp as ground glass, whipped across the icy gray desolation in bitter swirls and eddies. Taro kept his head bent, shielding his face from the wind and cold as he trudged across the wasteland. He didn't need to see very far to know where he was going. Despite the drifting, blowing snow and the dim light, he could see the tracks of his runway. At the end of the trail, Taro knew he would find his missing reindeer. He suspected that he would not find it alive. A healthy animal would not have wandered off aimlessly into the tajia, leaving the herd behind, and Taro expected to find this one dead or dying. Still, it was his duty to find it and to retrieve whatever might still be of use. If the meat was unfit to eat, there would still be the hide and the bone. He glanced up as something caught his eye, a glimpse of movement, a flicker across the ice. He blinked and peered upward. Something was moving across the sky above the clouds, something that glowed brightly enough to be seen faintly even through the gray overcast. The glow was brightening steadily, descending through the clouds and moving nearer at a fantastic speed. And then the thing burst out of the clouds in a ball of brilliant orange flame, washing the pale landscape in vivid color. It roared overhead before Taro could see it clearly. The air itself rippled visibly with the ferocity of the thing's passage. It was huge and made a sound louder than anything Taro had ever heard before, far louder than the howl of the worst storm he could remember. In its wake, the air seemed warmer. But what sort of craft could warm the Siberian winter itself? That had to be an illusion, Taro told himself. And then the thing crashed, with a boom that made the roar of its passage seem a mere whisper. Taro turned and stared after it. The horizon glowed orange, and again he thought he could feel heat, as if from some immense fire. That had unmistakably been a crash, not a mere landing. If that had been an American Aurora spy plane, then it was down, and the authorities in Moscow would want to know. The long Cold War might be over, but that didn't mean the Russian authorities would pass up a chance to get a good close look at some top-secret American technology. There might even be survivors, and a heroic rescue could be very good not just for Russia, but for Taro. He might be famous, might be taken to Moscow and given a medal or something. While he was reasonably content as a reindeer herder, he wouldn't mind a taste of city life, or at least a chance to pick up a few modern comforts. He set out across the ice, walking straight toward the orange glow and abandoning his hunt. His lost reindeer would keep. In the Siberian cold, anything would keep. After he had been walking for a little over an hour, Taro began to notice the warmth more than ever. He blinked it away and stopped in his tracks. The ice between himself and the ravine didn't look right. It glistened, not with the hard crystalline glitter it ought to have, but with a slick wet gleam. Taro frowned, took several steps, then carefully knelt down. He put a gloved finger to the ground, and then picked it up and looked at it. The tanned leather of his glove was darkened with moisture. The ice was wet. The rifle he carried on his back was rarely used. He had it not because he really needed it, but as a mark of status among his people, a reminder that his grandfather had fought the Nazis in the Great Patriotic War. There were few predators to defend against out here on the ice, either human or beast. The stories of wolves prowling the vicinity dated mostly from his grandfather's time, and might just be the lies of old men who wanted to reaffirm their own claims to manhood when they could no longer act as men. Now, though, he pulled the weapon from its fur-lined sheath and checked it over carefully. It seemed to be, as always, in perfect condition. The thing that had fallen from the sky in a fireball had landed inside the ravine ahead, he realized. If the fallen object was down there, any investigation would be difficult. Taro frowned and slowed his pace. Something flickered, just at the edge of his vision. He turned, startled, and brought the rifle to bear. On nothing. There was nothing there, just an empty plain of ice. Taro blinked and thought he saw a shimmer in the air somewhere to one side. He jerked the rifle over a few centimeters, thinking he must have caught a reflection on the ice, but a reflection of what? Then a light sparkled, 3 moving dots of red that skittered across the ice almost too fast to follow, then skimmed up his body and settled onto his forehead. The 3 of them wavering about until they settled into a tidy little triangle. Taro could feel them as tiny spots of warmth, could see the red beams, but he could not make out where they were coming from. Could not think what they could be. They seemed to be coming from a patch of empty air. Then something flared blue-white, lighting the snow on all sides. And Taro knew no more. Lieutenant Ligachev was 6 months into her first command and felt that she had settled in nicely. She was the lone officer in charge of the enlisted men of the Little Guard detachment at pumping station number 12 on the Asima pipeline on the eastern fringe of the Yamel oil fields. And as such, she was responsible for making sure the dozen pipeline workers at the station didn't go on strike, that the local reindeer herders didn't get into fights with anyone at the station, and that the Americans weren't going to invade across the polar ice. If anyone tried to sabotage the pipeline, it was her duty to make sure the attempt failed. It was 6 months into my first command when the station's seismometers picked up a disturbance not far from the main pipeline. Nothing unusual in that. Sobchak often monitored movement in the permafrost, especially during thaw. It wasn't the seismic activity that frightened him. It was the radiation. Ligachev stared at the chart. "What are you talking about?" she demanded. "This," Sobchak said, pointing. "This, Lieutenant. I don't know what this is. What I do know is that something happened that made the ground shake about 20 kilometers northeast of here, and that when it did, there came this burst of radioactivity. Ever since then, the background radiation has been 4 times what it should be." "4 times, you say?" "Yes," Sobchak said. 4 times. "And you want me and my men to go find out what this thing is that's radiating like this?" "Yes," Sobchak repeated. Ligachev stared at the chart. It might be dangerous, whatever was out there. She didn't know what it was, and all her guesses seemed wild. An American attack? A fallen satellite? Whatever it was not part of the established routine. "Right," she said. "Where is this mysterious radioactive disturbance exactly?" "The temperature out there is 34 degrees below zero, and it's snowing again," Salnikov said as he straightened his gun belt and reached for his hat. "The weather is just right for a pleasant little 20-kilometer stroll. Don't you think so, Dmitri?" Dolzakov snorted. "Oh yes, Pyotr, just delightful," he said as he yanked on his second boot. "I'm so pleased we're all being sent out on this little errand." He stamped the boot into place. "I wonder, though, Pyotr, if perhaps our beloved Sobchak's instruments would be just ever so slightly less sensitive if he were the one sent out to investigate every little knock and tumble." "That's not fair, Dmitri," Utkin said mildly, looking up from checking the action on his AK-47. "How many times before has Sobchak sent us out now? 2, maybe 3 in the past year? And how many times have we found anything?" Dolzakov retorted as he rose from his bunk and reached for his overcoat. "Last time, as I recall, a reindeer tripped over one of Sobchak's seismographs. How very important it must have been to investigate that and report every detail to Moscow at once." Utkin and Salnikov charged out the door to the waiting snow truck while the other men hurried to get the last few straps and buttons fastened. Ligachev watched them from the doorway, settling her snow goggles into place so the others could not read her eyes. The men had no idea why they were going out on the ice, what made this particular tremor any more worthy investigation than any other. They could hardly be expected not to grumble under the circumstances. Ligachev knew that and saw no reason to change the circumstances. She could live with the grumbling. She hadn't told the men anything about the radioactivity because she saw no reason to frighten them. Just children, with the bold Lieutenant Ligachev to lead them across the ice, she thought bitterly. She could still remember what General Ponomarenko had said the day he assigned her to the Asima oil field. "This is an important duty, Ligachev," he said. "Do well, and there may be a place for you on my staff." She could still remember his condescending smirk as he said it. A place on his staff indeed. And perhaps she could grow oranges in her spare time here. Ponomarenko had known where he was sending her, out of the way, where failure could be hidden or ignored. "Come on," she called to the men. "The snow won't let up for hours, and the temperature's still dropping. The longer you wait, the worse it'll be, and the sooner we get this over with, the sooner you'll get back to your cards and spirits." The men came and clambered onto the truck, an oversized tractor on snow treads, hauling a personal carrier. Salnikov was in the driver's seat, with the engine running. As soon as the last boot left the ice, he put the tractor in gear, and the ungainly vehicle lurched forward. Ligachev sat silently beside him as they headed out of the pumping station complex, out to the pipeline. As they approached the immense pipe, Salnikov looked at her confirmation of the direction. She pointed. He nodded and turned the vehicle northward. Ligachev looked out at the swirling snow and the cold darkness beyond, at the looming concrete and steel barrier of the pipeline that blocked out half the world. All of it white and gray, devoid of color, just shapes picked out in the glare of the tractor's headlights. She felt the fierce cold beginning to seep into the cab with her and Salnikov, despite the desperate blowing of the heater. It's getting colder, Lieutenant," said Salnikov. 40 below zero, and the snow is heavier. Perhaps we should head back, try again later. It's just 4 kilometers farther, Salnikov, Ligachev said, keeping her annoyance out of her voice. That's nothing. Enjoy the fresh air. Out here on the ice, the grandstanding and maneuvers of generals and bureaucrats and politicians back in Moscow all seemed a distant, stupid, pointless game. Reputation didn't matter. Power didn't matter. Staying warm, staying alive, that was what mattered. In extreme cold, she had heard engine steel turned brittle and could snap like balsa wood. More than 18 kilometers from the station, in snow and darkness and extreme cold. If they lost a tractor out here, most of them, maybe all of them, would die before they could get back to shelter. She frowned at the thought, but said nothing. The engine temperature gauge was still in the normal operating range, despite the cold outside. "Lieutenant!" Salnikov cried, and his voice sounded strained and unnatural. Ligachev looked up through the windshield as the wiper cleared away the latest smear of snow and saw what had triggered Salnikov's exclamation. My God. They were nearing the top of a low ridge. Ahead of them, in the headlight beams, on the ridgetop, a broad patch of snow shone a vivid red. A sprinkle of snowflakes had powdered it with white, but the red still showed up, shockingly bright. Above the red patch dangled a dark shape, swaying in the wind, speckled white with snow. "Stop the truck," Ligachev ordered, unnecessarily. Salnikov had already shifted into neutral. "Keep the engine running," she said. If the engine were shut down, they might never get it started again out here. The cold hit her like a gigantic wave, sucking the warmth and life out of her as she unlatched the door of the tractor and climbed out. She shivered involuntarily as her body struggled to adjust. Salnikov had climbed out of the other side of the cab, inching forward into the pool of light from the headlights, his AK-47 in his hands. Ligachev didn't stop him. When he glanced over at her, she motioned him forward. The shape was a man's body, suspended by a rope lashed around both ankles. His outstretched arms hung straight down, fingertips brushing the snow. His head was gone. Where his head should have been was a thin, dark icicle of frozen blood. Below him lay a broad pool of the same substance. Salnikov stared at the corpse for a moment, then down at the frozen pool, then at the snow around it. "Footprints," he said. "Footprints everywhere, Lieutenant. Big ones, see?" Then he looked up at the corpse again. "What happened here?" he wailed. Ligachev didn't answer directly. She couldn't. The only answer she could give would have been, "I don't know," and she couldn't say that in front of her men. Not yet. "Who is it?" she asked. "Anyone know?" "One of the villagers," Utkin replied. "Look at his clothes." "Taro," Salnikov said. "How can you tell?" Dolznikov said, his voice cracking. "His head is gone." "His rifle is there," Salnikov said. He gestured. "That's Taro's rifle. He was very proud of it. Never let anyone else carry it." "Footprints?" Ligachev asked Salnikov. He nodded. "Hundreds of them." He looked around and said, "They go that way." He hesitated. "And, Lieutenant," he added, "I've never seen such footprints. They're too big. And there are other marks in front of every print, as if something had clawed at the snow." "Perhaps something did. Do you mean it was a beast that did this? A beast that ties knots?" "More likely the killer had some sort of trained animal," Ligachev said. "Follow them, and be ready. Whoever or whatever did this is dangerous." She waved to the others. "Utkin, Vetrov, you go with him. If you see anything move, anything strange, fire twice. Don't take chances." Utkin and Vetrov nodded and followed Salnikov reluctantly as Ligachev called. "The rest of you, help me cut him down. We'll take him back to his people." The pole was firmly fixed in the ice, and none of the men could reach high enough to untie the ropes from its peak. Instead, 2 men held Taro's frozen corpse to keep it still, while a third sawed through the bindings with his knife. She shivered and glanced at Salnikov and the others. They had moved on down the slope to the east, following the trail. The wind carried away their words, and Ligachev could not hear them as they shouted to one another. "Look how big these prints are," Utkin said. "Whoever made them must be a giant." Vetrov knelt by the trail and shook his head. "Look again," he said. "The ice melted with each step, then refroze. That's why they're so big." Utkin stared at him. "Do you have any idea what kind of heat that would take?" He looked at Salnikov, who had moved on ahead, then back to Vetrov. "Besides, they must have been huge even without the melting. Look at them." Vetrov shrugged. "Maybe," he admitted. "The trail goes on past that next rise," Salnikov called back to them. "Perhaps from the top we can see something. Come on." Utkin stopped and did as Vetrov suggested. "Maybe," he conceded. "But I do not think that was what made them so large, Igor. I think it is a giant that we follow." He was sweating, he realized abruptly. His face was damp with perspiration and wasn't freezing. He pulled off his hat and crumpled it in one hand. No ice crunched, no snow fell. Instead, he could see the fur was damp. "My God," he said. "You two, can you feel it? The heat." He stared into the darkness. Where was the warmth coming from? He saw no lights, no fires. He could feel the heat, though, and something else. "Something's out there," he said. "Something. I can feel it." His vision seemed suddenly distorted, even more than the snow, the night, and the wind could account for. "What?" he began. Then he screamed and fell backward, sliding down the icy slope. Vetrov and Utkin had been crouched over the footprints as they advanced, not really listening to Salnikov. Now they looked up just in time to catch him as he tumbled into their arms. "Pyotr!" Utkin cried. "What?" He felt something warm and wet leaking into his heavy gloves. "Look at his face!" Vetrov cried. Utkin looked. 2 parallel slashes had cut Salnikov's face open, slicing from cheekbone to throat, laying the flesh open right down to the bone, and in fact Utkin could see a notch in the cheekbone itself, a notch that vanished beneath the welling blood. Blood was spilling from Salnikov's ruined face across Utkin's hands, and that was the warmth he felt. "What could have—" Utkin began, looking up past the top of the rise. He saw only a flicker as the blade came down at him. A voice echoed back at the men. A copy of Utkin's voice. It repeated back. "The heat." Vetrov had time to scream. Once. They had Taro's frozen body loaded halfway onto the truck when Lieutenant Ligachev heard the scream. It was faint and distant, muffled by the wind, but there was no mistaking it for anything but the scream of pain it was. "What in the—" She looked up in time to see something flare blue-white in the darkness beyond the ridge. "Pyotr!" she cried. Then she remembered where she was, who she was, and who was with her. "All of you," she barked. "Follow me, now!" Ligachev was shouting orders as she ran. "As soon as we reach Salnikov and the others, take up defensive positions. Use the ridge and the drifts for cover if you can. No firing until I give the order." And then, Starostin's head blew off. Ligachev staggered and stared. One moment, Private Anton Mikolachev Starostin had been running up the ridge beside her, eyes bright with excitement, with anticipation of his first taste of battle, and the next moment there was a blue-white flash, and Starostin's head was gone. Just gone. The light had flashed through tissue and bone as if they weren't there. Starostin's body ran another half-step and then collapsed in the snow, blood spattering across the white ground. But there was no enemy, nothing to shoot at. The white flash had come out of nowhere. "Where are they?" Dolzakov cried. "Fire if you see them," Ligachev shouted back. Then the white light flashed again, and Dolzakov was gone, his chest blown apart, one arm vanished, head flung back at a hideous broken angle. The light blazed again, but this time it did not shear through flesh. Instead it struck the tractor's engine compartment, and the vehicle exploded into flame. Ligachev knew then that she was going to die. They were all going to die, but she still didn't know why, or who was responsible. Fire came again as her foot slipped on the ice and she began to tumble. The white light and searing heat tore through her shoulder, and the AK-47 went flying in one direction as she fell in the other. Snow gave beneath her, and she rolled down the ridge. The world wheeled madly about her, a chaos of snow and cold and darkness and light. The hot orange flashes of guns and the cold white flare of the enemy's weapon, until she landed hard on the wind-scoured ice, her own wind knocked out of her. Snow tumbled down upon her, almost burying her. One eye peered out through goggles, while the lens protecting the other was covered by blank whiteness. She was dazed, stunned by impact, by the shock of her shoulder wound, by the bitter cold that seeped through her heavy coat and down the back of her neck. She lay for a moment, unable to think or move, as the violence around her died away until the only screaming was the wind, until nothing flashed or blazed. The truck was burning, there before her. She could just see it at the edge of her field of vision, but it had settled down to a slow, steady glow. No more explosions or flare-ups. The fire's glow lit the icy landscape a hellish red-orange, giving her light to see. Then she heard the crunching of heavy footsteps on the slope just above her, and she stopped trying to move. The enemy. The enemy was there, no more than a meter away, looking over his handiwork. She held utterly still, waiting, staring out the narrow area as she could see through her one uncovered eye. The man still lay there, and she tried to make out who it was. The creature appeared out of nowhere, a creature that stood upright like a man, but was clearly not human. Arcs of electric fire crawled over its body for a moment as it appeared, and then vanished once it stood fully exposed. She could see its shape clearly in the firelight. It was taller than a man, well over 2 meters in height. Its face was smooth, angular metal, and for a moment Ligachev wondered whether the Americans had devised some sort of killer robot and sent here for testing. 2 jagged blades slid out of the black wrist cuff and snapped into place, protruding past the creature's closed fist, both blades glittering red in the glow of the burning tractor. Then Ligachev fainted. And that was all she saw, until strong arms pulled her half-frozen from the snow. Human arms. Friendly arms. The villagers. Taro's people. They'd been drawn by the smell of the burning truck. They said I was lucky. Or maybe it's like the old ones said. Nothing really dies in the Siberian cold. They brought me back to civilization. Then you brought me here. When at last they put her into a clean uniform and sent her to see General Ponomarenko, the vision of Mikhail Barankin hung before her, like some unholy apparition, as she answered the general's questions. She stood at attention during questioning. In light of her condition, they did allow her to hold onto a rail for support as she spoke. She thought she understood why she was not permitted to sit. When she had finished her description of the nightmare she had watched from beneath the blanket of snow, she did not stop, but went on to say, "An entire army squad has been wiped out. Someone has to answer for it. I know that. The circumstances of my promotion and transfer just make it that much easier to hold me responsible, and I accept that. You need make no pretenses." Ponomarenko smiled humorlessly and leaned back in his chair. He took a long drag on the imported cigar he held, then took a moment to carefully knock the ash into an ashtray before he looked back at Ligachev. "I make no secret of it, Lieutenant," he said. "I did think your promotion was a mistake. Your actions in the field and the results only confirm my belief." He took another puff on his cigar, then leaned forward. "You're wrong, though, about one thing," he continued. "We aren't looking for a scapegoat this time. We don't want simple retribution. We want more than that. We want to know what really happened and what's out there. And whether you've told us the truth or not, Lieutenant, you know more of what happened out there than we do." He stubbed out the cigar and pointed at her. "So, my dear," he said, "we don't want your blood. It's worse than that." He smiled coldly. "We want you to go back." I'm in the dark again. Ever since New York, I'd been thinking about those things. Who were they? Why were they? Why had they come back for me? Rashi awoke slowly, his mind hazy. He didn't really remember where he was. He felt as if he'd been drugged. Had he? He couldn't remember. He still couldn't remember where he was, how he'd gotten there. He tried to see through the light, through the mental haze. A mask. He saw a mask hovering over him, and long yellow fingers were reaching toward his face. It was one of them, he realized. One of those things from outer space. "He's awake," someone said. Rashi forced himself to act, suddenly and decisively. He wasn't a young man, he looked overweight and out of shape, but he could still move fast and hard when he needed to, and he moved now, lunging at the thing in the mask, his hands reaching for its throat as he shouted, "Not again! You won't get away again! This time I'm taking you down with me!" His foe went over backward and tumbled to the floor. Rashi landed on his opponent's chest, and that unbearably bright light was behind him instead of in his eyes, so that he could see clearly again. A woman shrieked, "Sheriff Rashi, please! Stop it!" Rashi looked down and saw that the shadowy figure wasn't what he had thought. The mask was white paper over gauze, not alien metal. The throat in his hands was human. The yellow fingers were rubber gloves, and Rashi knew he couldn't have knocked over one of those alien predators anywhere near so easily. He released his hold. Then at last the mental haze cleared, and Rashi realized he was kneeling atop his dentist. "Dr. Krelmore," he said, suddenly remembering the man's name. Krelmore made a choking noise. "I'm sorry," Rashi said as he got off his victim. "The gas, I mean..." "The gas?" Krellmore said as his hygienist helped him up off the floor. I was imagining things that weren't there, Rashi said. Hallucinating, I guess. Hallucinating? Krellmore brushed himself off. I'm just a dentist, Sheriff, but I never saw anyone react like that just to the gas. He coughed. Your filling's all done, but maybe you'd be better off consulting, a psychiatrist or something. Rashi shook his head. I've seen enough psychiatrists to diagnose the entire state of Florida, he said. More to himself than the others, he added. Jesus, I really thought I was over it. He looked at Dr. Krellmore. I had this real bad time, he began. Then he caught himself. Telling his dentist that he'd been involved in a secret war against alien monsters on the streets of New York was not exactly a good career move. Look, Doc, he said, I'm really sorry for what happened. I'd appreciate it if you could keep this under your hat. He managed a sickly smile. I've been under a lot of stress lately, New place, new job. I'm still getting settled in. Sure, no problem, Sheriff. Your secret's safe with me. He forced a weak grin in response to Rashi's smile. Every time they show Marathon Man on TV, it's the same damn thing. You'd think I'd be used to it by now. 10 minutes later, Rashi was out on the streets of Blue Creek, thinking hard as he automatically scanned his surroundings, cop fashion. He didn't like losing control like that. Yeah, he'd been out of it from the gas, but trying to strangle a harmless tooth doctor was not a good sign, even so. He'd been the local sheriff in Blue Creek for a little over 4 months now, and he'd mostly thought he'd been settling in nicely. He'd thought he'd left all the freaks and crazies behind when he quit the NYPD and went west, but now he wondered whether maybe one of the craziest hadn't moved out west right along with him, right inside his own head. He'd spent most of his whole life in New York. If it hadn't been for those monsters from Planet X, he'd undoubtedly still be there, probably still working homicide or narco with his partner Schaefer, finishing out his time until retirement. The spaceships and the all-out firefight on 3rd Avenue had been too much for him, though. He'd left. He'd found the job as sheriff, gathered up Sherry and the kids, and come out here where it was safe. Rashi had been pleased to get the job offer. He'd sent out his resume from the hospital, and the reply from Blue Creek had been waiting when he was released. He'd grabbed it. He'd asked Schaefer to come with him, but the big man refused. Rashi had even offered him a job as deputy, and Schaefer had smiled so broadly Rashi thought that he might actually laugh, which would have been a first, Schaefer actually laughing at anything Rashi said. He had to admit the idea of Schaefer playing Barney Fife to Rashi's Sheriff Taylor was pretty absurd, but he'd kept asking as long as he could. It hadn't worked. Schaefer had stayed in New York. He wondered what Schaefer was doing right at that moment. He wondered whether Schaefer still had nightmares about those creatures. He wondered whether Schaefer ever had nightmares about anything. Schaefer didn't seem the nightmare-having type somehow. Nightmare-causing, yeah. Rashi could think of a few people who might have nightmares about Schaefer. He smiled at the thought. He'd have to call Schaefer. Just to chat. Sometime soon. The smile vanished. He needed to talk to somebody about those things. Somebody other than the psychologist who thought the aliens were stress-induced hallucinations. Somebody other than Sherry, who, sweet as she was, never knew what to say about the grimmer aspects of Rashi's work. Yeah, he'd call Schaefer soon. Very soon. Detective Schaefer stepped into his own office and stopped dead, staring at the man seated behind his desk. The stranger, caught off guard, stared back, frozen there, with one hand holding a framed photograph. His expression was smothered surprise. After a moment of utter silence, Schaefer said, Go ahead. Make yourself at home. Take a look around. Maybe you'll find some quarters under the seat cushion. Ah, the stranger said, carefully putting down the photo he'd been looking at. My name is Smithers, Detective Schaefer. He rose. I've been sent by... You're one of those army goons, he interrupted. Like Phillips and the others. The ones who thought they could handle our friends on 3rd Avenue last summer. I've got work to do, Smithers, he said. Real work. Whatever it is you came to say, spit it out, then leave. There's been an incident, Detective Schaefer, an entirely new occurrence. We believe your expertise, due to your previous experience in related matters, could prove invaluable, should the event develop beyond current expectations. Jesus, do you people spend your lunch hours memorizing a goddamn thesaurus? Schaefer demanded as he turned and opened his locker. Let me guess what you're actually telling me, shall I? The boys are back in town and you'd like me to check it out, for old time's sake. Exactly, Smithers said. There are some new elements, however. Fuck new elements, Schaefer said as he hung up his jacket and slipped off his shoulder holster. I've got a job to do here. Of course, we would clear your status with your chief and any other applicable agencies. I'll bet you would. Schaefer unbuttoned his shirt, speaking as he did. "You don't seem to get it, Smithers, so let me spell it out. The Schaefer boys have put in their time as far as Phillips and the rest of you are concerned. If you and the rest of your gang of hotshot special agents, or whatever you call yourselves, want to go for another tag team match against those ugly motherfuckers from outer space, you go right ahead. Have at it." He pulled off the shirt and slid it onto a hanger. "But you can leave me right out of it." "But, Detective..." Schaefer taped a wire to his chest, holding a tiny microphone in place. "No," he said. "I'm sure that if..." Schaefer continued to install the surveillance equipment, as he said. "What part of no didn't you understand?" "Damn it, Detective, will you let me finish a sentence?" Smithers shouted. "Why should I?" Schaefer asked. "Besides, I just did." With the wires securely in place, he reached in the locker and pulled out a gaudy pink and green shirt, the sort of thing tackier pimps on 7th Avenue wore. Smithers fumed for a moment, then said, "I'd think you'd want a chance to get involved in this." Schaefer started buttoning the shirt, then looked at Smithers. "Why? Are they in New York again?" "Well, no," Smithers admitted. "I knew it," Schaefer said, looking back down at the buttons. "I'd have smelled them if they were here. Listen up, Army boy. If they aren't in New York, I'm not interested. I don't like those sons of bitches, but there are a lot of people in this world I don't like, including you. I've done my time, Smithers. So did my brother. He lost his entire squad to them. I got my city shot up and lost my partner. We took down a few of those ugly bastards along the way. We did our best, and I'm willing to call it even if they stay off my turf. You tell me they're not on my turf, so you can just go to hell and take General Phillips with you." "That's your final word?" "My real final word would probably get me arrested," Schaefer said, giving Smithers a shove toward the door. "Now get out of my office before I sprinkle you with salt and watch you melt on the sidewalk like the slug you are." He pushed Smithers out and closed the door. That done, he glanced at the clock. Despite that little chat, he still had a few minutes to spare before he had to be in his position. He looked at the closed door. The man in the suit was making no effort to get back in, which was good, but that didn't mean it was the end of the matter. Even if Phillips and his buddies were willing to let it drop, that didn't mean Schaefer was. He'd been looking for Phillips in his spare time for months, and he hadn't found him, but now he might have a fresh lead. "Smithers, huh?" he muttered to himself. "If that's a real name, I just might want to look him up later. We might have a little chat about Dutch. On my terms." He fished a scrap of paper from the pile on his desk, found a pen, and scribbled a quick note to himself with just 2 names, Smithers and Phillips, with an arrow connecting them. After the Yautja invasion of New York in 1989, unfinished business lingered with Schaefer. The incident in Siberia would prove to be just the beginning of a new threat growing. This is the subject of Predator Cold War, the Dark Horse comic written by Mark Verheiden and the novelization by Nathan Archer. This is the second story involving Detective Schaefer, his clash against the Predators, and his search for the truth about his brother Dutch. This story and more will be further explored on the channel. As always, I'd like to thank you very much for watching today. Be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and be sure to subscribe to the channel to keep up with the latest from Alien Theory. My very special thanks today goes out to Nicholas Butta, our Wayland-Yutani executive, and Gregory Ford, the Patreon Hive Praetorian. A very special thanks to Lady Anne in the Ellen Ripley Tier of Excellence. If you'd like to join the Hive and support the channel, check out my Patreon page for further information. In the meantime, you can follow me on social media. Follow @alien_theory on X, formerly Twitter. Follow @alientheoryyt on Facebook and Instagram for more. And until next time, this is Alien Theory, signing off.